Integrity Project.
The Voter Integrity Project.
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 Jay Delancey, the director of the Voter Integrity Project.
Greetings, Patriots. By now, hopefully you've watched the videos on our website. I'm going to go through them a little bit, and part of what I want to do is do a close contextual reading of some of these, because you need to think about it if you are an observer or an employee for that matter, and what you can do in these situations. This is the page you should be on now, voterintegrityproject.com/observers, or if you go to our homepage, you just click over on the Observer tab. The Observer tab will bring you to this resource page where these videos are resident, and we've already made an intro video, and this page will look different because the intro will be at the top. Then we have these overview videos that kind of give you a sense of what's at stake, since we have no voter ID in North Carolina, and even if we did, these problems would still be at play. It would present differently as far as the evidence goes, but it'd be the similar problem. What I'm going to do is roll the video and then stop it to comment on it at times. We created this video back in anticipation of the voter ID amendment a couple of years ago, 2018 to be precise.
And I was waiting in line to vote, and there's about 15 people in line. And there was a guy in front of me, normal looking fella. And I was right behind him, and he had his hand like this, and he had a little piece of paper in his hand. And every once in a while, over his shoulder, I'd look, and he was looking at this piece of paper. And he did it about 10 times in about 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And I could see the piece of paper had a name on it. Just a single piece of paper, and it had Sam Brown or some name on there, and I don't remember what it was now. And he was looking at it. I was wondering, why in the world was he looking at this piece of paper? Well, we came up to when you get your ballot, and they said, what's your name? And he said, Sam Brown, and they gave him a ballot, and he voted. And I was next, and I was confused because I thought, why would this guy have to have his name on a piece of paper? And then they asked me, and I got my ballot. But as I was voting, I realized that guy was a voter fraud person. He was not Sam Brown. He was somebody else voting in that situation.
All right. Let's discuss Sam Brown. You are the voter, and you're standing behind somebody doing that. What are your choices, your options to take? You can complain to an election official. He was reading his name. He didn't know who he is. He's reading his name. They don't care. There's nothing they will do. Why? Because there's nothing in the law that gives them something to do. So I don't blame them too much. They flat out don't care. At that moment, you have one lever in the law, and it's a matter of your courage, whether you want to do it. You will have to say the magic words, I challenge that individual's right to vote. And they'll go, why? Why do you challenge that individual? You know, whoa, stop, everything. The burden of proof is going to be on you. And you will need to get it into the record that you watched this individual studying a piece of paper with his name and address on that piece of paper before he went in to vote. Now you think about it, if you do this, get ready, because they're going to accuse you of all kinds of bad things. Your name will be in the paper. Gee, he dared challenge this person. And God help you if the person is a different demographic than you are, because then they'll bring that up. You know, oh, this person was fill in the blank. So there's a degree of risk with this. Now we have another section we'll have on challenges, and there'll be a lot more about that. So don't just watch this one video and do it, or you're in deep kimchi. Challenges are a tricky business. The fact is, though, the burden of proof will be on you, and you will lose this challenge. Maybe. There's a way to win it. The key is you have to persuade the judges. During early voting, I don't know how they do it. They're supposed to have 3 precinct judges on election day to take this challenge and adjudicate it right there on the spot. That's how the law provides for these problems on election day. Now, of course, during early voting, it's a little trickier, but that's what they have to do. But the numbers, I'm not sure. It might just be 2 on that day, because the law doesn't really address that very well. And it would be very interesting to see what would happen were you to do this during early voting. But let's walk through this scenario. You see this guy going through there, and you see him asking, he goes up and he gets his name right and he gets his address right, and you go, no, there's something going on here, and I know there is. I challenge him. When you challenge him, at some point you're going to have your hearing. They're going to say, you have a burden of proof, and you'll go, well, get him to show his ID because he's not Sam Brown. And they'll go, no, there's no requirement for that. You can't ask for their ID. See, this is North Carolina, and we can't have good election law. You're not allowed to ask for his ID. Now, maybe you could try it. Maybe they would give it to you. It could be a HAVA I-D. It could be, you go, well, I left my wallet in the car. Well, go get your wallet, sir. We want to see it. Maybe they could do that. Or maybe he would call a lawyer and say, you're not requiring me to show an ID. The burden of proof is on you, because the burden of proof is on the challenger. So what do? Well, gosh golly, gee willikins. I hate putting this on video because then they'll just have more information on that piece of paper. But the answer is really simple. All you do is say, with the judges standing right there, I said, all right, that piece of paper is what he kept looking at with his name on it. Get him to hand you that piece of paper. And he hand you that piece of paper. So don't let him look at it. Ask him what a street name is, what a street number is. Ask him what his zip code is. Ask him what his date of birth is. Because you have that information. If you're an election official, you have that information on record. If this individual is reading their name off a piece of paper that many times, he probably doesn't know his date of birth. He probably doesn't know his zip code. There's probably a lot of information this individual doesn't know. So that would be the way to take that challenge and do it in a way that it'd be hard for a chief judge to vote against you when that happens. They might do it for purely partisan reasons. That's fine. The key is to get the information in the record as to why you did it. At that point, I would call the county. One other key there is you note the name of the voter and you note the time of day, exactly when that voter went in there. Very important. In that challenge, it should be documented very carefully. But the key there, really, ultimately, is that you file that challenge, you are putting a blip on the radar that this person committed or was attempting to commit voter impersonation fraud. Probably will get away with it, and you'll probably be dragged through the mud. But you note that name very carefully, because there's more research you can do when you go home, because you've got the name and address of that voter, and you can go find out, is he really that voter? You can look on Facebook. You can find the real Sam Brown if you can get that name that he's using, which you should be able to do in a challenge. Get that information, document it, and you may lose the challenge that day, but contact us and we will help you publicize that in the court of public opinion. And this is a key I'll say over and over again. Don't just call your party, contact us. We want to stop fraud, and we can't do it when people get cute and hold the information back. The second case, very similar to the first. There were two of them doing it. This again is a time worth filing that challenge if you happen to see this, whether you're an observer or whether you're just standing in line and you see someone do this in front of you. It's critical that we document these cases. Now, in a case like this, you're going to be alone. And the other thing to do is to see if any employees see this too. Did you see them do that? Did you see them read that information? Especially when they don't even know their name. If the voter doesn't know their name, that's an easy challenge. Now, what happens? You file the challenge, again, hell breaks loose because you're a vote suppressor, because you're challenging this. These people, the key is to get your message right. This individual had to read his name off of a piece of paper. This individual did not know his name. everyone knows what that is. And if you're going to call it, if the other side's going to call it vote suppression, say, well, yeah, it was an illegal vote. I wanted to suppress an illegal vote. Does that make me a bad person?
It was a non-marked white school bus, kind of looked like a church bus. And about 45 to 50 individuals, elderly folks, exited the bus, and each one of them was taking a piece of paper out of their pocket and presenting and reading their address to the chief judge, and they were given voter ballots and on the vote.
Now that individual, he asked us to maintain his privacy, so we had to blur his face. I don't want that to be a distraction. What he saw, there was a problem with what he saw. Obviously, these people were reading their names, but he was not an observer, and nor was he a voter. He was standing around the area, but he had no legal standing to be there, except he was a greeter, and he'd been outside. And this is important. If you're a greeter and you see people doing this, it's very important that you go in and watch. You just watch. Go stand in line like you're voting. Get behind them and just watch. I know you're supposed to be greeting, but fraud is your #1 issue. You're not going to need to be handing out. If you're a greeter, great, I'm happy for you. But honestly, you need to be an observer. The priority would be observers first, then greeters second. I'm thinking anymore, most people know who they're voting for. And plus, every ballot, every race, rather, in North Carolina, except for soil and water district, every race has a partisan label on it. So for this election anyway, you don't need to be a greeter, but if you are a greeter and you see this kind of activity, go inside. Stand in line and watch these people and listen. Are they reading their names? If you can write them down, by all means do so. Are you going to be able to challenge them? Maybe, maybe not, because it's just too many of them. But document it. You could certainly challenge them. It would be a big stink, and I would love it, because election officials have gotten away with claiming there is no voter impersonation fraud, mainly because of people like you and people like we've seen so far didn't know what to do when they saw it. And election officials, well, we're going to talk about that in a minute, because they don't know what to do either. And this is part of the indictment of the overall process.
I happened to notice a Hispanic woman step up to be the next one in line to vote. She had this piece of paper in her hand. She unfolded it, and she began to attempt to say what was on the piece of paper. And it appeared to me that she was trying to say a name in English, a first name and a last name, and an address. But she was having so much trouble with it.
What do you mean?
Her ability to pronounce the name and the street address in English was such that it was completely impossible to understand what she was saying.
Wow.
It got to the point where the poll worker finally just reached up and took the piece of paper from the woman, had the name and the address on the piece of paper, flipped through the records in the laptop, found the name and the address, and printed out the ATV form, gave the woman the ATV form, sent her on the way, and gave her a ballot.
It's important to note here, he was an employee. An employee, think about that. He saw the crime right there in plain view, and he had no intervention means. He could have made a stink. It probably would have cost him his job, as we'll see later on. It does. It will cost you your job in many cases, depending on the ethical value of the government employees that your county has hired to administer their elections. And I won't name names, but I'll say just about every single one of these election administrators have been compromised in one way or another. And it's very sad to see that, very sad to say that, because they're nice people. They have a lot of allies, and you work with them and you like them. But then when push comes to shove, you see what they're made of when they're under pressure. And we see situations like something I'll show you later in one of the later videos. But for now, I'm going to talk about that individual. He was sitting beside the election employee who took the piece of paper. And I won't defend him, but I understand he did not know what he could do. He was not trained to be there at that moment. He was there for another reason. He was not a trained election worker, but he did see what he saw, and he knew what he saw. The employee broke the law by taking the piece of paper from the voter and inputting the information. That was a violation. If you ever see an employee doing that, you need to make a stink. You need to either challenge that voter and to get it in the record that this is what he did. Actually, that's what I would recommend, because if you go to the chief judge, they'll sweep it under the rug. But if, as an observer, if you're a trained observer, I will say one other thing about that, and that would be to document it. And we'll cover documentation in our next module.